Joining us now to talk about the findings of the latest YPO Global Pulse Index is Gil Oved, who is CEO of Creative Counsel. Good morning to you, Gil. Every now and then we talk about this, and it's nice to have a measure of where the confidence is. Confidence levels have dropped. I think that's the big picture from your latest survey. But before we do that, just remind us the YPO, what it is, and what this index is and how it came about.
Okay, so YPO WPO is a global organization. It's got about 20,000 members, all CEOs running fairly large organizations with large employment. Over 50% of those members are actually outside of the United States, even though it was started in the States about 64 years ago. Of those, 2,000 members were surveyed for this global index, which has been around for about 5 years. And in Africa, about 200 of them responded.
Okay, so the base is 200, but these are 200 influential people.
Influential.
Big companies, big employers.
Correct, big companies, big employers, and very diverse in terms of country and in terms of industry. So
presumably weighted heavier towards the bigger economies, so Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya.
Correct, that's spot on.
All right, so what's the latest one telling us? And just the number I have here is that confidence levels tracks them on a quarterly basis.
Yes.
Down 2.2 points to 61.8. Yes. What do these numbers mean?
Okay, so look, overall, Africa is still an optimistic environment. I think that's something that we should consider as an umbrella. But that said, relatively to the previous quarters, it's not looking great. In fact, for the first time in 4 years, the African index is below the global composite. So I think very disappointing and very concerning. So whilst it's still high, 62.5 is the global index, and we're only at 61.8.
And this may reflect also, if you think of the global financial crisis, emerging markets came into fashion,
Correct.
Growth prospects for Africa.
Yes.
Now, increasing optimism again in first world markets.
Correct. So there's an outflow, low interest rates, all very positive for the developed economies. We're taking the strain. In fact, in the BRICS economies, only India stepped up this index. All the others were down. And of course, Africa, you know, when everyone else sneezes, we catch the cold.
So, I mean, on the one hand, these look like statistics,
Yes.
but on the other hand, economists predict, but it's the CEOs who are telling us this.
This is CEO sentiment, a leading indicator. I think something that's quite important is, in terms of Africa, I would call this a tale of two countries. South Africa, the South versus the West, Nigeria. And they're both quite heavily indexed. You've got South Africa that's come down dramatically, just under 5 points
from the last
quarter. No surprises. We've got the scandals, corruption. We're just about to face elections.
Electricity concerns.
Electricity, the unions striking and the continuation thereof. And of course, if you think about it, we've got this ramp up towards elections, which is a concern. The other side of the coin is Nigeria, which, apart from the terrible news that we heard this morning, which absolutely catastrophe, at the time that the survey was run, which was the first 2 weeks of April, was the same time that the rebasing was announced in Nigeria. And if you look at it, that's the ultimate in confidence. No fundamental difference in the economy, but of course, from a perception perspective, it verified what we always suspected, which is that the GDP is the largest.
I think just look at the graph that you're talking to here now. We've got Nigeria as the red one there, and
correct.
South Africa.
And then you've got South Africa, and they're both meeting. So what Nigeria gained, which was about 4.6 points, is similar to what South Africa lost, which is 4.9 points, and they're both meeting. They're pretty much the same place.
Kenya is still higher than both.
Kenya is still higher, and but I think all these numbers are pretty stable across the board. Another important point that doesn't come out in that graph, and I think it's worthy of mention, even though small economy, small country, it's our neighbor, Zimbabwe. Very sad story. It is the only country in Africa that's got a pessimistic perspective from its CEOs. It's at 45 points.
Because your index below 50 is pessimism.
It's pessimistic, above 50 is optimistic. And then it's, of course, degrees of optimism and pessimism.
And how, talking about Zimbabwe, I mean, they've said for a long time, you know, if you get into Zimbabwe now in terms of investment, then you've got a low base and you've got good times to come.
Look, I speak to a lot of CEOs who are in the organization, specifically from Zimbabwe, and that is not the comment that I've been hearing in the past few months. Lots of companies closing down. Okay. And the biggest comment is there is no cash in the economy. You cannot move. It's completely stifled and really sad.
So you can't actually do business. That's
you
the
can't
problem.
do business. You can't do anything every day, and you can't employ. And in fact, this survey is broken down into 3 distinct parts. So it's sales forecast, employment, and fixed investment.
Let's just talk employment.
Yes.
We can't talk about all the detail there,
Yeah.
but what about those projections?
So again, very positive overall, very optimistic overall. So we've got, in terms of the employment numbers, we've got over 56% saying that they expect it to remain the same, but 37% of CEOs are saying that they're going to increase employment because they're expecting sales to increase. We've got 75% of people, just under, of our CEOs saying that they expect sales to increase by 10% or more in the next 12 months. Greater sales, more employment, it's all looking good. Even investment is the highest in the world, the expectation is in Africa. So it's really all kind of contributing to that optimism.
Where can people find this report to find out more about it?
So it's www.ypo.org/global pulse.
And I'm sure if you just remember YPO, you'll find it. So
Yes.
interesting stuff. And of course, confidence can change quickly. So
As it
just
does.
as it can be very bad, it can be very good depending.
Well, 5 points in one quarter, I think. What can you say about that?
Good, John.